Authentication mechanisms, actually, we continue from where we stopped last class. The token-based authentication scenario, we presented two utilities, which are the smart card and the memory card. Both of them, we said that they are sort of appliance to its hardware to carry on with you wherever you go. The unique difference is the capability to give you specific as actually interaction. They store some data, either utilize them like they are. We talk about memory card. Other than that, we talk about smart cards, since you are able to adjust or update the content. Sort of smart card, the one that has a microchip in it, which you can update, yes, but using specific constraints, referring to a specific platform, let's say. Sort of actually microprocessor, yes, that holds some area for storing data, and another portion for making an arithmetic processing tasks, something like that. It is equipped with different sorts of memories. We talk about a ROM, static memory, ROM, read-only memory. We talk about an electronically erasable, programmable ROM. We talk about a RAM that can be utilized for processes, since it is giving you the chance to act in it. So it is smart. Why? Because you can adjust and update. So there is a volatile memory in it. It is a RAM. Actually, it has the capability to be indicated as a memory card. Why? Because it has some data to utilize like it is. The smart card, trivially, it acts as a memory card, since it stores data. So it is statically pointed. But when we talk about the dynamic process, since we are able to adjust some data in it, maybe totality of the data inside or portion, whatever. So there is a dynamicity to be seen when interacting with those sorts of cards, the smart cards. Basically, you talk about the credentials that you have inside your own profile, inside. So they are dynamically set, means you can adjust them frequently based on time slots. The challenge, actually, the issues and the difficulties when dealing with those smart cards, if they are highly dynamic in the sense of they are securing and encrypting its contents, generating hashes frequently and continuously. The challenge actually to share the hashed values to the server side or whatever controlling party, the controlling tier, to have the new set secured party. It is possible to be done by the smart card, but the challenge and the issue is that how to share this hashed value with the controlling party or with the controlling tier. The sense is that, remember, when we talked about the conventional encryption, the cryptography in general, the conventional and the asymmetric, the symmetric and the asymmetric, we had scenarios when we used the public key in both parties, the conventional encryption, symmetric, and we had scenarios where we used only we used two different keys, one public and one private. This is the asymmetric cryptography. The same scenario actually here at that time when we utilized the private and the public key, we had to share the public with the server somehow, or we shared the public from the server to the client. So there is a scenario how to share that. Here the same scenario, when we generate a hash for a key, for example, the key utilized here, whatever, any value, regardless what is it. But when we make a hash, so we are securing something, and it has to be communicated with the controlling party, the smart card, to be utilized by the door, for example, to be utilized by you to open a door, by the owner to open a door, for example. The door, how he will recognize the data inside and let you in, open you the door, if the thing is newly hashed. So the server that controls the door has to know your hash in order to give you a word, in order to accord you access and to allow you in. Thus, the hash has to be shared prior utilization. this usage prior utilization, prior that you utilize this hash, your smart card, it is a constraint. It is not easy to share the hash, the newly set hashes, specifically, with the controlling parties talking about the service or whatever, because the thing is remote. It's wirelessly connected. It's actually my card, my smart card. If I utilize a smart card, it is in my pocket. It's not shared with the server. I'm not going to give it to the server again and again and again. No, never. This is not the process. This is not the way. This is an issue. Actually, it has to happen how there are scenarios, but you have to recognize that it is not something to be set easy, and it's not to be set automatic. It's not to be autonomous. It is to be with some controls somehow. Another kind of smart card. Actually, we use the USB dongles, USB flashes, but special for authentication. They are given only to authenticate you. Those kinds of appliances or hardware, they are utilized to give you access to electronic systems, to e-systems somehow, not to open a door or something, but there are remote systems accessed through the www or through specific network, dedicated networks. You can open and reach the resources if the dongle is connected to your device, which is actually a flash disk-like. It is a USB device. Nominated dongle, why? Because it is dedicated to a specific platform. It has some specific sort of data, and it has to run with as a complement to an to a priorly existing e-system. In the same context, token-based and the authentication, the e-cards in general, and the e-cards actually, when you talk about smart card and memory card, both of them, they are actually appliances, and they are hardware, and they are actually either to be utilized with a magnetic reader, or specifically when we said the dongle, USB dongle, it's a sort of hardware to be connected to your device. The e-card is still we may classify here actually this e-card as a function to be detected or dedicated from the smart cards and the memory cards. If I ask you actually now to make you understand more, if I ask you now what are the distinction points in between the smart card and the memory card, you say that it is the capability of adjusting the content only. The same way here, some functionalities they are in between. This is actually a common point in between the smart card and the memory card is the utilization. And here we see the E activities, which is the E identification of candidates or users. We may actually, if you see the Omani national card, it is equipped with a microchip, and this is an example of a smart card. You cannot yourself adjust, but the company owner or whoever said this card can have actually it has the capability to adjust the content. Thus, trivially, it is a smart card, and this is an e-usage. You can use your e-card, actually your e-identity, for different activities across the Sultanate. It is a good example. We can refer to let this sort of smart card to serve us. Whatever the example is. The context of the authentication using a smart card and in an electronic environment, actually, it is based on 10 steps that we have to go over, starting by making just a simple request, and you just open the interface, the front-end interface where the system starts from. Then after, immediately actually request to the web application or the server application or the provider has been submitted. It would redirect you to the destination. Then after, it would redirect you to the correct destination, number 3. I'm explaining these steps here. It will redirect you to the correct destination, and the correct destination actually it would ask you for an authentication which you have to submit. Who are you, man ant? This actually authentication, it will be actually requested through an ID or a PIN or something. This PIN you have to create it, or you have to it is your ID, let's say. Authentication actually protocol would control this exchange now, because the PIN is private to you, and it has to be confirmed in between you and the server. There is a protocol that has to control this exchange. There is a scenario to let's say, hide the exchange of your credentials. You see the arrow, it is a double-sided arrow here, number 7. Then after actually the authentication, if validated, now you'll be redirected to the resources. So if validated, it will be redirected to the resources. Then actually the resource will be granted to you, the service will be granted to you. Those 10 steps, they are basic authentication process using the let's say the smart cards. Whenever you ask money from the ATM, from any ATM machine, those 10 steps would happen before you get the money. Actually, to receive the money, or to be given the chance, to ask for an amount of money to see that window, those 10 steps would happen. Third authentication scenario, the biometric authentication. The biometric. Remember that the authentication, we said that either you have to be something, or to have something, or you do something, or you are something. You are, you possess, you have, you do. Biometric is that you are something. Your face shape, your face, your photo, your fingerprint, your hand actually shape and size and so on. Your retina, your eye view. Actually, there are here actually these iris. It's a device that does the reading of the retina, the eye print. Your signature, handwriting, the voice. You are something. Biometric authentication. There are actually levels. There are levels of trust towards such authentication mechanisms. Those are good technology that we may refer to the biometric authentication, but does not mean that we can trust it fully from the beginning to the end. No, because of the devices we may refer to read such givens, which are your shape, your fingerprint, your print in different ways, and your, let's say, gait, your movement. Those are things that you cannot trust usually. There is a level of accuracy. Different tasks to do based on the usage of the biometric equipment, let's say, authentication. We have an enrollment, verification, and identification. Graph number 1, it is dedicated to an enrollment to a system. You are going to register to a system using the fingerprint, actually, as a biometric, let's say, character. Then verification. It's another process. It's a completely different process. Here you have in a system, we do the first task. In a system, we do the second task. In a system, we do the third task. So we see the steps and the interfering functions to accomplish such a task: the enrollment, or the verification, or the identification. Remember, verification means that you are proven your ID. And the identification is to present your ID. The talked ID here is your fingerprint. Fingerprint. Since we are in the biometric context, we are authenticating you as a user using a biometric measure. Enrollment. There have to be a sensor to read your fingerprint. And thereafter, the shape of your fingerprint has to be recorded. Somehow there have to be actually a function to record the shape of your fingerprint and read the feature of your fingerprint, then store it in a data store in backend. Pin name, actually the ID which you used actually, or the interface which you used, has to identify you. Also, this identification has to be immediately submitted to the data store, along with the feature extracted from your fingerprint. Enrollment. Second context, after you enrolled in a system, so you are not going to re-enroll every day. Take the example of the EDWay. For example, EDWay, your username and password, they have been set for you once. Later on, you just identify yourself. You just identify yourself and you get verified. You log in, you log in, you log in. You don't register again. The same way, the enrollment is to happen once. Later on, either you identify yourself or you verify yourself or whatever. You do another task versus the same system. In phase to the system, you do another thing. You do not enroll again. You already are enrolled. The same ID has been set. You cannot give your fingerprint twice. The system will recognize that. He will reject. He will tell you you are already there. He will not let you enroll again. For the phase of the verification, what are the interfering parties? The sensor again. Fingerprint, you have to give your shape of finger. The sensor will read your shape. Features will be extracted. They will not be stored now. They will be actually utilized. The features extracted from your fingerprint would be utilized to match with the ID of the interface you used. Actually, the ID you inserted through the interface utilized will determine the already stored feature of your finger that it is actually stored during the enrollment phase. The one that found in the database would be matched with the features extracted from the newly set now, what you set now, your fingerprint set now. If matched, verified, true, false. If matched, yes, verified. Otherwise, no, false. It is not verified. One template to be taken here. The verification. You give a fingerprint, yes, the sensor will read that. At the same time, you assign a PIN, a number, an ID. The PIN is already enrolled in the database, and it is matched, and it is actually correlated with an already enrolled fingerprint feature. The PIN will identify the feature stored in the database. The system will extract the features from your fingerprint now you put, and he will compare the system also, what he extracted now, to the one matching the PIN. If true, verified, false, not verified. Full stop. Third scenario, which is the identification. Third scenario, which is the identification. Here, we are not going to match your fingerprint to a specific one stored. No, we're going to match your fingerprint, yes, the features of your fingerprint extracted from the biometric sensor, to the totality of the templates available in the database. If it matches one, you are verified, you are identified. If it does not match any, you are not identified, no verified. Repeat this last scenario. Identification. It's a context to give also your fingerprint to the sensor. The sensor will help the system extract the features of your fingerprint. Those features will be actually utilized to compare with the totality and templates. And templates here, see, with the totality, and means many, the totality of the features available already in the data store and background. If any matches the one extracted now, so identified. Otherwise, no, you are not. Means otherwise, what does it mean? None of the available here has matched what the system extracted here. So you are not identified, or the user is not identified. Any questions, please? Great. Continue. As we said, the accuracy actually it is not a context of 100% trust. It is one of the prominent and the very let's say prominent and successful scenarios that we use to authenticate parties. Based on some circumstances and some situations, the biometric is the solution better than utilizing the password based or the let's say the token based. Biometric is in some scenarios is much appreciated, but it is not the most accurate. It's not the most accurate. What does it mean most not accurate or accurate? It means it is punctual. When we give the eye, he will definitely define you. If you give the fingerprint, he will definitely identify you. If we give the voice, he will definitely recognize you. Not usually valid. It's not usually valid. Let me maximize this view to make you visualize better. Yeah. Good. What you have to understand from this graph, this is actually a graph that the system or any, let's say, biometric-based system or biometric authentication system will generate something similar to this. This is actually a sort of a numerical representation of the matching percentage between the real, let's say, biometric component, what you give in real time, and the stored value, the stored features in the data store. See the blue part here. The blue part here is the accurate portion. The other, they are not. The others, they are not. What you have to see here is the decision threshold. This decision threshold, it's a very small area compared to the, let's say here, the false position, or the whatever. Let me explain to you verbally what the features has been, what the system has extracted as real features now, and what they are extracted from the database already installed. It's a very small portion that matches that you can extract. So this imposes to us the challenge to adopt such authentication mechanisms in the let's say sensitive systems or whatever. This small portion, but still it is allowing us to adopt such scenarios, because this is a common view to all biometric features, and there are differences. When you talk about the fingerprint, it's not like retina print, the eye. It's not like the voice. The voice is very very crucial, because the noise is there, and the device, they may influence the recognition of the voice. So limitations are there for specific biometric features, and very let's say the accuracy would be more high for others, like the eye print or the fingerprint. Still talking about the accuracy contest or accuracy challenge. 2 million let's say features has been actually compared, and the error rate actually it was about 10% for the majority. See here the number, it's 10% almost for the majority. Actually the means that actually the error rate is weak enough to neglect the biometric authentication scenario. Here for 2 million features, we have 10%, which is almost 200,000 from those 2 millions. It is big number, absolutely, it is big number, but it does not lead us to neglect to take off the biometric as a solution for authenticating the parties, because remember that there are some circumstances that they push us to authenticate candidates using biometric solutions only. We have to utilize in some situations, medical health, or let's say for military tasks, that are situations where candidates have to be, candidates in plural, have to be authenticated using biometric solutions only. Password-based or let's say token-based, it's not a solution. So, because of this analysis here, we have the scientific reason and the scientific proof to go for behind the biometric, let's say biometric authentication mechanisms. From the usages of the biometric solutions here, from the usages of the biometric solutions, we talk about the remote. As I was saying, now there are circumstances and situations where we need to authenticate parties based on the using the biometric authentication, like military tasks. We need to authenticate users remotely, and remotely actually it's cross countries, one in Dubai and one here in Oman. Borders, actually the military task has to identify parties entering the countries, or entering a specific country at the border. So there has to be actually a biometric let's say solution to identify candidates personally and remotely. Remember this. I will not dig in the math representation here of this remote authentication. But this remote authentication that needs from us to utilize the biometric remotely, it is a question of something to be secured, because the attacks and the interceptions in between here actually protects against such issue to face. This biometric remotely set, it is, yes, it is a mandatory task. Scenario via which actually you have to understand, I avoided the math, but you have to understand the scenario, how it is happening, this remote authentication. It is a context like the biometric 10 steps. Here we have actually only 4 steps, and we do that. Request from the user to the provider. Then after, actually an identification tool has to be submitted. The identification tool has to be filled by the user, setting up the let's say the PIN, submit again, then after yes or no, validated or no. I repeat, request to be submitted to the provider. The provider will provide the authentication scenario, what you have to fill, your username. There is no username here because we talk about authenticate biometric. So your shape, your fingerprint, or your retina, or your voice, something, you have to fill it, and then after submit it to the provider again. The provider will do the process and, yes, approve you or reject you. Biometric-based remote authentication scenario. It's said actually for password, but it is the same context for, let's say, any biometric feature. Like we defined the brute force at the beginning and the dictionary attack for the password-based authentication systems, here we represent actually one of the very famous attacks against the biometric scenarios, which is the Masquerade context. Actually, it is taken the role of a legitimate user. The Masquerade is taking the role of the legitimate user. What does it mean? I am Fulan, but an attacker will pretend that I am Fulan. This context of pretending being another person, it is a masquerade. Why it is a masquerade? It is not something else. It's not an hijacking, or let's say any other context. Because we are using the biometric, he has to present his I instead of me. He has to speak and pronounce something using a voice similar to my voice, and so on. So it is a biometric. Remember, it is an attack to mimic that you are a legitimate user. This mimicking here is not something habitual. Thus, it is nominated and said to be masquerade. مجزرة masquerade ترجمة حرفية. ولكن here it is context because it is taken and mimicking your place. Similarly, when we talked about the brute force and the dictionary attack, which is actually you have to guess and to list of passwords and test them. The same way here, the attacker has to mimic or impersonate a legitimate user. Countermeasures for such attacks here, the guess of passwords, the brute force and the dictionary attack, yeah, to strengthen your password. The same way here, actually, the masquerade there have to be scenarios where the system has a very weak and small attack interface, where an intruder or whatever, any attacker might impersonate a legitimate user. There have to be actually limitations. Okay, context of usability of the authentication, issues, security and issues. Let me come back. Yeah, still continue. Actually, when we talk about any authentication, there are actually security techniques and security concepts has been applied, and also at the same time there are security issues that we may exploit, and an attacker might exploit and might utilize also. Host attack is one of the contexts that the attackers might refer to, actually, to attack a host. A host means it's a provider, so a web server, web application, database server. It's a host provider, it's a host attack, but then in which an attacker attacks the service provider. Okay, in this context here, simply and in an abstract way, and at a glance, we say that we have to make a countermeasure, like when the system is utilizing, for example, the password or the passcode to authenticate candidates, there have to be actually a context of securing the pass phrase or the pass words or whatever the pass actually tool utilized. If it is soft thing, we have to create a hash, or we have to encrypt, or we have to generate a message authentication code to concatenate it with the message or the whatever, concatenate it to help the communication be more secured. These are countermeasure. So based on the authentication scenario, we set a countermeasure. Eavesdropping is another technique that attackers refer to hack some credentials. The eavesdropping stands for listening without permission, or just here it's a sniffing. It's a context, and technically it is a sniffing, and we know it is a sniffing. Sniffing actually it is to just monitor the traffic by only visualizing the content. Only visualizing. We are not going to modify anything. And this visualization, it needs to be done by an intruder, not an insider, not a party from the company. The eavesdropping, it is to be done by an intruder. Means an attacker would access an area where he has not to be there, and he visualizes the content. He's doing an eavesdropping. Countermeasures. The same way. Actually, you have to strengthen your content, and mainly you talk about cryptography. You have to generate cipher, and you let's say encrypt all your communication or your communications. Another context via which to prohibit intruders of accessing unwanted areas or unpermitted areas, and then after doing the sniffing or the eavesdropping, is by doing more than one authentication mechanism, which is the multi-factor authentication. We don't use only password-based or token-based, or let's say one of them only. We set more than one. You have to use a password, then after let's say a token to be submitted to you, then after let's say a token-based, then after let's say biometric device and biometric feature has to be submitted. So we have more than interface, we have more than one phase to authenticate the user in order to reach the let's say the requested service or the service area. Thus, we prohibit intruders from being successfully intruding the environment. Multi-factor authentication. From other perspectives, the countermeasures actually there have to be actually a chance for a system administrator to block a user credential or regenerate a new password for a new user or for an existing user, something like that. So privilege actually role here. We have to give a higher privilege to an administrator, a local administrator, to have a control on the account. Once hacked, he has the capability to block or to, let's say, change the role or just limit the role or restrict the role of a given candidate. Can you repeat what I just said right now, please? Can you just repeat what I explained to you now? Yes or no? If you hear your name, please just pronounce yes. If you hear your name, please pronounce yes. Say yes.